the moment I realized I was just an option in his life didn't come with shouting or tears or some dramatic scene in the rain. It came with silence. I was sitting in my car outside his apartment, watching the light in his living room through the window. My phone was in my hands, the last message I had sent him still sitting there unanswered. "Are we still on for dinner tonight?" 3 little gray dots had appeared earlier, then disappeared. No reply. That was the 3rd time that week. At first I told myself he was busy. Ryan worked in tech, always talking about deadlines and meetings and launches. I tried to be understanding. I tried to be the cool girlfriend, the one who didn't complain. But as I sat there in the dark parking lot, something inside me started to feel different. Not angry, just tired. Because this wasn't the first time he had cancelled plans. It wasn't the first time I rearranged my schedule just to see him. And it definitely wasn't the first time I felt like I was waiting for permission to exist in his life. Ryan had a way of making everything feel casual. "We'll see. Maybe later. I'll let you know." Those were his favorite phrases. At the beginning of our relationship, I thought it meant he was spontaneous, mysterious, independent. Now I understood what it really meant. It meant I was never a priority. I watched someone move behind the curtains inside his apartment. For a moment, my heart jumped. Maybe he'd forgotten to answer. Maybe his phone died. Maybe. Then the door opened. Ryan stepped out, laughing. But he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, holding her purse as they headed toward the street. She said something that made him lean closer to hear her. And then he did something I hadn't felt in months. He smiled at her the way he used to smile at me. Warm, interested, present. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not because he was with someone else, but because in that moment I finally understood the truth. I wasn't losing him. I'd never really had him. For a long time, I had convinced myself that if I was patient enough, supportive enough, understanding enough, eventually he would choose me. Eventually he would see my value. But sitting there in that quiet car, watching the man I loved walk away without even knowing I was there, I realized something terrifying. Maybe the problem wasn't that he couldn't see my worth. Maybe the problem was that I had been hiding it. And that night became the beginning of a realization that would change everything about how I loved and who I allowed into my life. Because sometimes the hardest lesson in love isn't learning how to fight for someone. It's learning when to stop fighting and walk away. But before I understood that, I had to go through one more heartbreak. I met Ryan 2 years earlier at a mutual friend's birthday party. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. In fact, he was standing near the kitchen counter, quietly scrolling through his phone when we were introduced. But when he looked up at me, something about his calm confidence pulled me in immediately. He had this relaxed energy, like nothing in the world really bothered him. At the time, I thought that meant he was emotionally mature. Now I realize it mostly meant he avoided anything that required real effort. Our first few dates were incredible. Ryan could be charming when he wanted to be. He remembered little details about things I said. He brought me coffee one morning before work. Once he drove 40 minutes just to surprise me after a stressful day. Those moments felt special, rare, and that rarity made them powerful, because the rest of the time, Ryan lived in his own world. Sometimes, he would disappear for a day or two without answering messages. When I asked about it, he would shrug and say he'd been off the grid. Sometimes he cancelled plans last minute, but he always had a way of pulling me back in. He would show up unexpectedly with flowers, or send a long text at midnight saying he missed me, or kiss me like I was the only person in the world. And every time, I told myself the same story. He's complicated. He just needs time. He'll eventually realize how much I care. Looking back now, I understand something important. I wasn't actually in a relationship, I was in a pattern, a cycle of attention and absence that kept me constantly hoping for the next moment when he would choose me. My friends noticed it before I did. My best friend Natalie said it bluntly one night while we were having drinks. "Emma, you realize you're always waiting for him, right?" "I'm not waiting," I said defensively. "You are," she replied gently. "You rearrange your entire life around whether he might call." I laughed it off, but her words stuck in my mind, because deep down, I knew she wasn't wrong. Ryan never said we were exclusive. Whenever the conversation got close to labels, he would smile and say things like, "Let's not rush things." 2 years, and we were still seeing where things go. But I stayed, because every once in a while he would look at me with that same warmth from our first date, and in those moments I believed the version of him I fell for was real. I just thought I had to earn it. I thought if I loved him well enough, if I was patient enough, eventually he would realize I was the one person who never gave up on him. What I didn't understand yet was that love should never feel like a competition. And the moment that finally forced me to see that truth was closer than I realized. A few weeks after the night I saw Ryan leave his apartment with that other woman, he called me like nothing had happened. "Hey," he said casually. "What are you doing tonight?" No apology, no explanation, just the assumption that I would still be there. For a moment, the old version of me almost answered the way I always did. Available, easy, understanding, but something inside me hesitated. "I have plans," I said. The silence on the phone lasted longer than I expected. "You do?" he asked. There was something strange in his voice, almost surprised, like the possibility that my life might continue without him had never crossed his mind. "Yeah," I replied. "What kind of plans?" The question sounded casual, but it felt different now. For the first time in 2 years, I realized Ryan wasn't asking because he cared about my life. He was asking because he wanted to know if he still had control over my time. "Just dinner with friends," I said. Another pause. "Well, maybe we can hang out later," he said. Maybe. That word again, the same word that had kept me in emotional limbo for 2 years. "Maybe," I answered. We hung up. That night I actually did go out with friends, not as a distraction, not to make Ryan jealous, but because, for the first time in a long time, I wanted to remember what my life felt like when it wasn't revolving around someone else's schedule. Natalie noticed the difference immediately. "You seem lighter," she said halfway through dinner. I laughed. "I just didn't cancel plans tonight." "Progress," she said with a smile. Around 10 o'clock my phone buzzed. "Ryan, you still out?" The old version of me would have left immediately. Instead, I looked around the table. My friends were laughing. The restaurant was warm and loud and full of energy. For once, I felt present. "I'm staying here for a while," I texted back. His reply came quickly. "Oh, okay." No follow-up, no effort, and in that moment, something clicked. Ryan wasn't incapable of choosing someone. He just didn't need to choose me. Because I had always been there, reliable, patient, waiting. The moment I stopped waiting, everything started to change. But Ryan wasn't going to let go of that dynamic easily. And the next time we saw each other, the truth about our relationship would finally come to the surface. A week later, Ryan asked me to meet him for coffee. Not a maybe, not a last-minute text, an actual plan. That alone told me something had shifted. When I arrived, he was already sitting at a table near the window. He smiled when he saw me, but it felt different now. Like I was looking at a stranger wearing a familiar face. "You've been hard to reach lately," he said. I almost laughed. For 2 years, I'd been the most reachable person in his life. I've just been busy, I replied. Ryan leaned back in his chair. I feel like you're pulling away. The irony of that statement hit me so hard I had to pause before answering. I think I've just stopped chasing. He frowned. What does that mean? It meant I had finally noticed the imbalance. It meant I had realized how much energy I had spent trying to prove my value to someone who was perfectly comfortable keeping me uncertain. But instead of explaining all that, I asked a simple question. Ryan, what are we? He looked out the window, the same way he always did when conversations became uncomfortable. You know I don't like labels. There it was. The answer I had been avoiding for 2 years. For the first time, I didn't try to negotiate with it. I didn't try to convince him. I didn't try to explain my feelings in a way that might make him understand. I just nodded. Okay. He looked surprised. That's it? That's it? Because suddenly the situation felt incredibly clear. Ryan wasn't confused. He wasn't emotionally unavailable. He was comfortable. Comfortable keeping someone who cared about him close without ever committing to them. And I had allowed it. Not because I was weak, but because I believed that love meant patience. Now I understood something different. Love without respect isn't love, it's attachment. I stood up from the table. Ryan blinked. Wait, are you leaving? Yes. Emma? You're overreacting. Maybe I was, or maybe I was finally reacting exactly the way I should have from the beginning. I deserve someone who chooses me, I said quietly. For once, he didn't have a clever response. The weeks after I ended things with Ryan were harder than I expected. Not because I doubted my decision, but because habits are powerful. For 2 years, my emotions had been tied to his attention. When he texted, I felt excited. When he disappeared, I felt anxious. Breaking that cycle felt like learning how to breathe in a new way. But slowly, something incredible started happening. My life expanded again. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I started making plans without wondering whether someone else might need me later. I remembered what it felt like to wake up without emotional uncertainty. A few months later, Ryan texted me, Hey, I miss you. 3 simple words. The kind of message that once would have pulled me right back into his orbit. But when I read it now, I felt something surprising. Nothing. Not anger, not longing, just clarity. Because I finally understood the lesson that relationship had been teaching me the entire time. Your worth is not determined by how someone else treats you, but by what you tolerate. Ryan didn't treat me like an option because he was cruel. He treated me like an option because I had accepted that role. And the moment I stopped accepting it, the dynamic disappeared. I never replied to that message, not out of bitterness, but because I had already moved forward. These days, when I look back at that version of myself sitting in her car outside his apartment, I don't feel embarrassed, I feel compassion. Because she was doing the best she could with the love she had. She just hadn't learned yet that the most important love in any relationship is the love you have for yourself. And the moment you truly understand your own worth, you stop asking people to choose you, because you've already chosen yourself